Awesome. And let's see, I'm gonna paste the agenda to the chat room. Okay, cool. That's done. Um, and oh, hi Dimitri, good to see you. Um, and I was just saying that this is recorded just so that everyone knows. I started the recording. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen for the agenda, and I also pasted it into the chat room, the agenda link, just so everyone has it. Let's see, share. Oops, wait a minute. Let me try that again. Share. Okay, great. So I'll just do a quick introduction and um, just mention that I added some notes from that were based on what we had discussed in the platform call this week on Tuesday, where we talked about split out TCKs, and I included the link to the platform call agenda, so that maybe after, if anyone wants to look at them, when they want to look at them now, that's fine. But that's where we came up. The question came up of, isn't it a problem that the platform TCK and the new split out TCKs, or, the new standalone spec TCKs may have the same test or duplicate, they may duplicate tests that are in both places. And oh, hold on, let's see. I need to let people in. Okay.
Uh,
I just let the
this
people
is
in. Yeah,
this is
go
not
ahead.
this is actually not a question of is it possible that both bundles, I mean split out and Jakarta TCK's platform tests, have the same tests. This is actually it's definitely possible, but this is not what we want to have, because it introduces two sources of truth and increases their support efforts, right?
Yes, but it's not. Yeah. So I added a point here, and it's arguable, debatable. That's why we're here. But I did add what I tried to be a point of point for constraints and costs introduced if you have um, um, if the the standalone spec TCK contains tests to validate platform requirements, and um, and if the standalone spec test doesn't contain those, which in is two different situations, and that we could find ourselves in. And I think that kind of covers both sides. But on the on like if the standalone spec TCK doesn't contain the platform validation tests, then the standalone spec doesn't have dependencies on the other platform specs. If the standalone TCK does have platform level tests, then that standalone spec has a dependency on platform specs, and it creates, chicken and egg type dependencies where I'll just summarize quickly and just say, let's in the example I mentioned, let's say that like the batch TCK depends on EJB, and the batch spec goes final, but then EJB spec, and let's just say there was some changes in flight for that release. The EJB spec then makes a change that is breaking that TCK, the batch TCK that contains that batch, batch TCK contains EJB test, and that breaks that TCK. The batch spec has to release again. It needs a new TCK, probably a new spec release, and I call that the cost. And there's probably other things that it's not just straightforward that it has to be one way or the other. The spec, in my opinion, the spec team should decide that. But that's what we're here to discuss, and I think that kind of gives a sense of both sides. So I will give the floor up to whoever wants to respond to that.
So Scott, I was going to say, at least in the JSON P&B cases, right, the dependency is only that the container, the JSP and the servlet containers must be compatible, right? So that if servlet or JSP were to change after, say, JSON P&B had finalized, right, JSON wouldn't need to change. The servlet container is just responsible for assuring that its compatibility with requirements are still met. So it's I think your conclusion is absolutely correct.
Yeah.
That the dependency relationships can't be ignored. They must be considered by the corresponding spec teams. But it isn't always the case that just because there are requirements across different component specs that every change is going to have a domino effect.
Definitely, it's a worst case. It won't always be the case that we're removing the spec, but in the scenario I mentioned, it's only if and only if in the JSON P case, let's say some servlet spec API that the JSON P TCK was validating at the platform requirement. That spec API for servlet is used in the TCK that's already final and was part of the ballot for JSON P. Only in the scenario where that API is removed for whatever reason, JSON P didn't know that was going to happen, but that happens after. So JSON P only in that case has to then repeat. So I guess that's
right. So in this case, I think the dependency is in the opposite direction, right? If servlet were to go final and JSON P, and it as part of its, actually, I'm not even sure if servlet spec has this requirement or if it's just a platform. But in any case, let's say the servlet spec, the servlet container had somehow indicated, had somehow become final, and there was a change in JSON P, right? That could inflict a retest on servlet. But if it's the platform spec that says the servlet implementation in the platform must be compatible with JSON P, right? Then So then it's up to the platform implementation to make sure that they have achieved those requirements that may or may not have a corresponding ripple effect into servlet. Right? Again,
very true.
The spec teams have to do the analysis and make sure that they have covered the dependency relationships correctly.
Yeah. So JSON P, because of what it would be because of the platform validations that it does. And, from a dependency point of view, yeah, 100% correct. It's not likely to go for this scenario that happened with JSON-P, but for batch, um, where batch depends on it. Yeah, sorry, where batch validates EJB, enterprise beans, that could happen because it's an inverse dependency relationship. Batch would go final before EJB does, because EJB always goes final at the end because it depends on the platform TCK.
So in the case for JSON-P, right, I think the main sort of technical issue we have to resolve here is how are we going to stage the JSON-P TCK so that it can run in the two required containers, right? I mean, that's for me, that's the fundamental technical problem that needs to get resolved today.
Right. So for me, the question is, so CDI has done this for a while. It has a set of tests and it relies on Archillion to spin up the containers that it needs to test. So when you're testing the platform, it's injecting it's already put in the CDI implementation and library into whatever platform is being tested. And then it uses Archillion to deploy those tests. So the question for me for EE10 and JSON-B and P is, I mean, do we have a test framework that can do that? If not, then can't we just strip out the existing platform test to be a minimum test of each of the required containers?
Yeah, but this is what you're saying, Scott. It requires Archillion, right? And we actually didn't use Archillion in our standalone tests, and that's split out.
Right. That's what I expected. So for EE10, that's what I'm saying. Can't we just have the new standalone TCKs and take the existing platform TCK for JSON-B, for example, and just remove everything but basic validation that JSON-B implementation works?
Well, I think this is the total validation, right? They take the test in EE9, right? They take the JSON-P standalone, they spin up JSP, and they verify that the compatibility tests all pass, right? And they actually, what I think they do is they actually interleave all the tests, running one in JSON-P and one in its servlet. Then they run the next one in JSON-P and then in servlet. In this case, I think it will be easier for the test development effort to just, spin up servlet, run all the tests, hopefully they pass, then spin up JSP, run all the tests, hopefully they pass, right? So if we can, I can't believe that Java test can't cannot do that. But I guess I would have to defer that the answer to that question to the people that actually have expertise in that. For me, that'd be Guru or Allwyn.
Yeah, but JSON-P tests are not Java test based, right? So that's exactly the problem. That it's my understanding of a problem is that currently there is no technical ability in Jakarta TCK project to spin and run not Java test based tests in different containers. So it's not possible
how
now.
How are we going to run these tests with a platform?
So we'll set up the standalone TCK test to run and
in Java in the current using the current tool.
So there's right now users set up the CDI and other standalone TCKs. They'll now run additional standalone TCKs with their EE implementation is, for the standalone TCKs that do work, so that do contain, the platform validation. So in the case of when it comes to running the platform TCK, you'll only run, what's in the platform TCK. The platform TCK itself is not, at least not for EE10, is not going to wrap all of the other TCKs that in the past we've always run separately. The difference is now there's new standalone TCKs that also have to be set up and run. And again, this was something we wanted to do that integration as part of the refactoring. But yeah, I don't think we would be completing that. But maybe we would have completed it by now. I don't know. But we basically stopped mid fall, pushing on that, and
Well, I don't.
so, but we didn't. Yeah, we
I
didn't.
only see.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I only see three possibilities for EE10. The simplest, frankly, is just to keep the duplicate tests, and you have to run both. The next would be, is there any way that you can get the J test harness to bridge to JUnit tests, an external library of JUnit tests? The third is that you have to update the JSON-P TCK to use Arcalian to spin it up. I mean, but longer term, the ideal thing would be that the TCK harness has an ability to run external JUnit or TestNG tests in the target containers. But that's going to be a lot of investigation. I don't think there's any possible way we can do that for E10.
Maybe one more option to consider. I don't know how much work that would be, but given that those JSON tests are just simple JUnit tests, I believe there exists some test runner for JUnit. So an option could be to create new test in a current TCK, which would be implemented as JUnit runner run list of tests and somehow report results.
I mean, traditionally so there are some TCKs that are just run directly against Glassfish, and then there are some that use a porting kit. The porting kit basically is just a bunch of, as I understand it, it's a preliminary set of setup and configuration actions that are scripted to get the platform into to the necessary state. Then the TCK itself is run.
Yeah, that would remain. The difficult part would probably be how to package var or EJB jar or a client for a client and deliver it on the server. Then the rest is quite easy, I would say. But okay, I don't know, because I have no real experience writing tests in current harness. So just an idea thrown away.
Yeah. So Guru or Alwyn, I mean, can you comment on, is that possible? Is that something that we could contemplate here?
Basically, porting kit we use for CDI TCKs. Basically, we run the CDI TCKs with Glassfish using a porting kit. But the scenario in platform TCK with JSON-B and JSON-P, which we discussed a couple of times in platform TCK meeting, is that vehicles are not supported. The EJB vehicle and app client vehicle, those are not supported for standalone TCKs. That's the major issue we will face even if we have a porting kit. Porting kit will run as if it's running on a container, a servlet or EJB container, but vehicles concept will be missing from that.
So I don't remember seeing EJB or app client test results in the current JSON, the EE9 JSON PNP results. So is that a requirement?
I
For JSON P and JSON B, there are vehicles defined. Scott, if you can share the vehicle.properties for
Well,
Jakarta, that will be great.
it's yeah, I'll do that in a second. Let me just highlight the from the spec text. Yes, it's there, and then from the I'll open up the properties file. Let's see. Okay, let me try that again. Copy.
So where are those run?
Let's see. So it's all on the agenda, but it would, you know, this is where I copied it from.
I understand. So
okay.
I agree that you copied that, but where are those test results? Because I didn't see them.
You didn't see them. Okay. Let me just look in. Let me look in my. Let's see. Open up the sheet.
Maybe you don't need to answer it
Okay.
immediately. So can you? We should find out where those test results are, because I didn't.
I saw them.
See them.
I mean,
in the at least in the test results that I looked at.
But Ed, it should be fine, because currently for Jakarta 9.1, JSON B and JSON P tests were part of CTS, basically, right?
I understand that, and I looked in TC. I'm just kind of surprised because I didn't see them in the test results, and I did look at the CTS.
I thought I saw.
Or at least I thought I looked at the CTS.
Let's talk
but
after the call.
I'll
share with you after the call what I'll look again, and I'll give you a link of what I looked at, but we can do that after this call, probably, if you have time.
It sounds like there's a fundamental problem that we cannot stage those containers in the current test harness. Is that correct?
We're talking about running. So we're talking about running the standalone TCK tests from the platform TCK, and it's not a problem that I mean, it'd be nice to do that, but I don't see the requirement for the platform TCK having to run tests from the standalone TCK. I guess you're trying to eliminate the duplication, and that's great, but we just don't, like, to integrate Java test harness, to use the JUnit test classes, we're basically that's something we don't have that integrated, and I could see running like a standalone TCK, but it would just be like the user doing it. So that doesn't help. We're really talking about, we want to run them against the vehicles that we have, set up with Java tests. And it's just, we have this huge TCK that it's been 20 years in the making, and we could, if we bolted into JUnit, it would just be, it would be a real, really, we talked about it, but it seemed like a problem we didn't need to solve. If we try to solve that now, I guess you run a JUnit test, but the JUnit test doesn't know how to deploy. So you have to, there's not much you're reusing from the JUnit test. And, it's just, both test frameworks aren't compatible. So they're just different.
Yeah, but the idea was that you run test written for current harness, and in that test you just invoke the JUnit test.
Yeah, but
through API, and one probably would have to pass in something connecting results and to be able to report it back to the harness.
Maybe. I mean, maybe.
And then the test written for a harness will be able to be executed within the container or through that vehicle or whatever.
Right. Basically, you'd be you know,
Yeah,
so
but-
the porting kit would be invoked to do the deployment, right? So they have to be, you know, like right now, Ant, you know, we have all these Ant scripts that build
Yeah.
the deployments, and instead, um,
That would remain. It would still deploy the test, execute the test written for the harness, and that test being run would underneath execute the JUnit and run everything with it then within that particular container or context or whatever.
yeah. So I guess it's basically, you know, it's updates to the Ant scripting. You know, it sounds like, you know, making changes in the Ant scripting.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it would be about correct
and-
packaging of stuff,
and-
that can be
and-
difficult.
and creating new like wrapper TCK tests that kind of probably do whatever's, you know, missing, whatever you know is missing to.
Yeah, you do need the vehicle components and AJB, a servlet filter, et cetera, actually making use of the API under test. In other words, you're not really validating that it integrates in that container. So it's not just as simple as running existing JUnit tests unless they're already referencing those components, which is what CDI does. So CDI sets a test that are using EGB components to exercise CDI features.
Scott, but actually both JSON-B and JSON-P, but don't use any container features. So
Right, I know, but that's the issue. It is truly a standalone SE level
correct. So
TCK. So that's what I'm saying. Why we do need platform level tests that validate that a given JSON-B or P implementation can be used in the containers.
exactly.
So for me, the simplest approach for EE10 is we're just going to have to keep the duplicate tests. I mean, long term, ideally, I don't want to have to be writing because of the TCK cyclic dependencies. The ideal thing is that a given platform could write, specification team can write, this is our expectation for JSON B and P integration and servlet, et cetera. But we don't have to deal with the Archelian integration, you know, that there is a framework in the platform or whatever higher level container that wants to validate the behavior, could just pull those tests in. So that's the issue for EE10. Is there anything we can do even to attempt to do that?
Yeah, is it possible to copy that code back? I mean, I think I agree with you, Scott. I don't, at this point in the project, I don't see how, it doesn't appear that we can stage, you know, we could just create that vehicle or set up the vehicle and then throw those tests into it, right? But, you know, that's, ideally that's what we'd have, but we don't have that, so.
Yeah.
So the tests will be
so-
in both. There'll be duplicated tests then, you know.
Based on everything you're saying, I don't see how we can avoid it. And I guess I haven't heard anybody speak up to an alternative.
Well, yeah, no, because even if we could run the JUnit tests as they exist, they're really not covering what we need to cover. So that's the other issue.
Oh, that's not true. They're covering everything what's previous Java test.
Actually,
They cover what needs
it's
to
half
be.
and a half. It's half and a half. For JSON P and B, they would cover everything, but for CDI, it would definitely not work because, as Scott already said, CDI has a lot of other dependencies. But for JSON P and B, I think that would be sufficient.
So why we can't in this case just require in the user guide for the platform that implementation runs standalone test, which can be found at that URL, right? And in the platform tests, have just one or maybe several, depending on the spec, simple tests which does test that JSON binding is accessible in this container, like running simple serialization or whatever. Just simply testing that it kind of callable.
So that's what the tests do now, right? The tests explicitly run against each container. And I think in this discussion, what's been stated is it's not possible to pre-configure that so that each test that's in the JSON-B test suite will be run, for each of those 4 containers.
No, I think I meant something different. What I meant is that we have a bundle of split out tests, standalone tests, right? And this is our standalone tests, and they are not running as part of a platform test, right? As part of a platform test, we have just one test, which tests that JSON-B is accessible, is callable in the servlet container. That's it.
Right, and then you got to do that for the EJB container and the JSP container and the app client container.
So,
yes.
So Dimitri, there's not like a requirement for manipulating EJB method parameters or anything like that type of stuff. It's just strictly
not in JSON-B.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Well, then maybe there is a simple way. So which version of JUnit are you guys using? Is it 4 or 5?
5.
So maybe there is just a way to create a new simple servlet EJB and app client vehicle that really just launches the JUnit suite.
Well, that's what the porting kit would do. But just a minute ago, Scott said that we couldn't.
Well, right now it doesn't. Well, I just don't think it has the integration hooks with JUnit right now is the issue, right?
I don't think that's it. I don't think it's the integration hooks. Scott, when you said you can't run those vehicles, could you just clarify that?
Sure. When you run a test, you already, you already have an app server already up and running. You basically are invoking an Ant script that calls into the user's deploy. It's like a Java in the porting kit. It's like a Java class that does the deployment, and it's told this is the particular deployment, and the deployments are all on the disk, and the porting kit script that gets invoked can do whatever it likes to handle the deployment, and it can add it like vendor deployment descriptors at that point, everything that's needed. So basically, I guess like for these JUnit tests, they would have to. I guess we would have to like add in the parameter that tells the user that they're setting up for a JUnit test, but they should go ahead and prepare that test to run and deploy it, and do whatever modifications they need.
Yeah, but there must be some like stub from the test harness that's emitting the results, or I mean, how are the results collected and
they just go to
integrated?
There's a the Java test harness just throws an exception basically. So up a higher level gets an exception. So in the case of JUnit, we would just need to we would just have to go by the exit code and kind of say throw some fake exception to say that the test failed. In terms of like results collecting, that's just kind of like on the disk and done in a known location kind of thing, and that's kind of not an issue.
But just hang on a second, right? So we are always talking about JUnit, right? But the idea is that we use JUnit only in standalone tests, and in the platform tests, we just have one test which is not JUnit, which is Java Test Harness.
Yes.
And we actually have a bunch of these tests already. We delete everything, We
Yeah.
keep only one.
Okay.
Yeah, we're
and
talking about
and
we're talking about two different things, and but yeah, I agree with Dimitri
Well,
that
that
what,
is what I mentioned originally.
what Dimitri is saying is what works now can work now, and I think Scott, you said it as well. Just have some platform tests to validate the requirements. We just kind of jumped, or I thought we were jumping back to the kind of like bolting the Java test framework and the JUnit test framework, and I thought we were kind of getting back to talking about integrating those, and
Well,
I think it's out of scope of this meeting. So we need really to decide what to do with JSON binding, JSON processing tests, which are already JUnit 5, right? And if we agree that the solution is that we keep standalone JUnit 5 based, and in the platform, we just keep a minimum set of tests, ideally 1 or 2, which just test accessibility of the spec within the container, right? We already have a full set, but we reduce them to minimum number of tests.
Yep.
And
So
if it's sufficient, then we're good.
So I can only guess why the requirements are state what they state, but I think the goal of the requirement is to assure that within each of these containers, whether or not they are regardless of how they are implemented within the container, all the requirements of JSON-P are met, right? Let's just use JSON-P for now, right? So in the tests right now, they will run each of the TCK tests against each container, right? And I guess so if each container has a completely independent implementation, or if each container shares a common implementation, those tests will verify that the container meets the requirements, right? And so, Dimitri, what you're suggesting will result in that sort of has an implication on how the platform is implemented, right? And I guess I would rather we didn't go down that road.
Let's
that's kind of I'm making some assumptions, yes. But in general, if we require JSON-B implementation, which used in the platform, to pass all TCK tests, and JSON-B specification itself doesn't have any dependencies requirements or doesn't use any other specifications used in the platform, which is true, then it would be sufficient, at least what I think it would be sufficient, that we declare in the user guide that platform implementation of JSON-B should pass standalone tests, which is JUnit based, and it passes the minimum number of platform tests, which just test that JSON-B is accessible. Because JSON-B doesn't use any additional features or doesn't depend on other specifications. It's a losing requirements. I agree with that. But for me, it sounds fine.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the existing JSON-P tests and the platform TCK. They look pretty minimalistic anyway. So is there really concern about duplication?
Yes, there is, at least for a JSON-P, there is one test in the platform which is really specific to it. And with JSON-P, we had some issues in the past passing it. It basically verifies that user provided implementation through in a web app, for instance, through webinf lib can be loaded and used instead of the server provided one. So this is one sort of test. It's called Plugability Test, which definitely have to stay in the platform, and that's what platform should definitely run in each container and everything. So this is one
Right.
really important test, just to know that.
Right. So if you basically delete all these JSON-P API tests, I assume most of the duplication is there because that's where the bulk of the tests are. If we just delete those, I mean, it seems like the remainder is certainly providing all the integration testing.
So in the platform TC, for the validation of the platform requirements, we have one proposal, which is have a minimum number of tests, which, you know, in some cases that could be just the signature tests in each of the vehicles. And I think that, for the case where we already have platform tests that are doing more than that, if we went to the minimum, whether it's only signature test or some small subset of the current platform tests, as Ed said, we would be losing some testing. Is that a platform discussion that we should just have separately from this? And, you know, in terms of driving which tests we remove or don't remove from the platform TCK for JSON P and B? Is that a
Well,
separate?
it has to be a collaboration between the platform team and the spec team, because I mean, I have to ask the spec team which of these existing platform TCK tests for JSON-P are really effectively just duplicates that are already being handled by the standalone TCK now.
Can that conversation where is a platform TCK investigating too, or is it just the spec team that's kind of stating what the platform requirements
The platform team controls what the requirements are.
The platform team certainly has to say, well, are you testing blah, or if that's a requirement?
Okay.
How are we testing? They have to understand that.
Okay.
So again, to the point of, that's why I was trying to understand what are exactly the requirements. If we're just requiring that I can invoke the API, that's one thing. But as Lucas said, you do want the ability to customize the behavior of the API with classes that are coming from the container level deployment. Something that's been bundled with an EGB jar, that's been bundled in a war, etc. Those are relevant tests that we need to keep at the platform level.
I mean, personally, I'm in favor of keeping tests in the platform, only because I've seen many cases where it helps implementations find bugs that they otherwise wouldn't have found if those weren't there. Because I don't know, I've mentioned this example before, but you have like a servlet controlling a user transaction that invokes a persistence context operation over multiple invocations, and a different thread is used, and you find some bug that you wouldn't have found otherwise if you didn't have those combinations of operations being invoked.
Yeah, I mean, the platform should certainly be focused on the integration tests. I mean, that's what it should be for.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. So for the specs like servlet, it's definitely better to have all the tests, TCKs, in the platform tests, because servlet basically integrates with many things, right? But for JSON body and JSON processing, I'm not sure about that. And just remember that the convenience of standalone JUnit test is that when you make your implementation, you can run these TCK tests as part of your Maven build and easily detect problems, right? So it's kind of a trade-off, as I understand, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we need to solve it somehow, because release date is closed.
Yeah.
And this is a blocking issue for these two specs, right? So sooner we solve it, sooner we submit specs for ballot.
Well, so I mean, it seems like to me the best proposal is to just remove the API test. Does the TCK JSONP API directory, does that have any integration test? Or is that strictly implementation functionality that now is being handled by the standalone TCK?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm just not sure how we make this decision, right? Because Ed, for instance, disagrees, right? And
well, no, I think that's the proposal that we take to the platform, you know, and have well, Scott's representing the platform TCK, and we have others representing the implementations, and we have people representing the specs. Can we just make that decision? This is the proposal, and decide that that's acceptable for EE10?
okay, makes sense to me.
I'm not sure I disagree. I'm just, I don't like reducing the compatibility requirements, right? So.
Yeah, and yeah, agreed. So that's what I'm trying to understand is there a clear separation between integration tests and basically just functionality tests that are maybe not only consumed, but probably extended in the new standalone TCK?
Yeah, we definitely need to do it with a minimum loss, right? Or even with no loss, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we might also decide, well, we'll do that for 10. We'll bring them back in 11. I mean, that's also possible.
In 11, it would be better to actually make this vehicle, which allows running JUnit tests as part of the platform tests. So
Right,
that
that's what
one,
I mean. You're bringing the tests back. Right.
yes.
Yeah, we're 11.
In,
Sorry, go
go
ahead.
ahead. No,
I was just, the big change we're making for the refactoring is just, is switching to, multi module, Maven, projects that, move off of the Ant and the Porton kit and can integrate into, with, JUnit or TestNG. We didn't actually pick one, but the idea was to start basically start creating the same same TCKs in the platform TCK that could be just easily extracted into standalone TCKs with the platform integration already ready to go. And then just kind of like if we wanted to split it up, because we already we'll have all of the standalone TCKs ready to go almost. They just happen to live in the platform TCK repository. That's kind of the idea. But that should integrate more easily as well with separate TCKs.
Okay.
So my proposal would be is that we have the spec team validate that some subset of the existing platform TCK tests are really just implementation tests that are now superseded by the standalone TCK and can be removed, and whatever integration tests remain are not duplicate tests. They are additional tests that are dealing with the platform level requirements, and so we're going to have to run a standalone TCK and those integration tests. Sans the tests that have been superseded by the standalone TCK.
So I think the platform test requirements will be run the standalone TCK, and the platform TCK will contain some tests that are copied or ported from the extracted what did you call them, the Plugability Tests. Well, those will actually continue to exist inside the platform TCK project and be tested against each container. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, but for JSON P and B, those integration tests already exist in the TCK, right?
I don't know if they've been updated and then copied back.
that's the thing. They haven't been,
Well, it sounds
that-
like, yeah, they haven't been with it all in the standalone TCK because they
They-
were strictly.
they haven't been updated in
I
the
mean, that's how
platform
Lucas
TCK.
Well, that's the issues there. If there's API changes, they need to be updated.
So the tests in the extracted TCK that are common need to find their way back into the, the tests in the extracted TCK must be, that are going to be common to both the standalone TCK and the platform TCK must be identical.
They need
Right,
to,
so
they need to be identical, or they need to test the current, you know, the
the
updated
compatibility
API.
tests must be identical, however that is accomplished. It means
Is
you've
it?
got to port the test back. If someone's, you know, someone can look at them and say, nope, this test doesn't change, I'll just leave it. That's fine too. And that's, you know, there doesn't have to be a physical copy action.
Yeah, but the issue is that there's tests that just don't apply to the standalone TCK in the platform TCK.
If they're not in the extracted TCK, I thought they were there.
No, what I'm hearing is they're not, because they depend on container deployment features. Is that not right?
Lucas, are those pluggability tests in the standalone TCK?
Yes, I have it in JSON-P, but they run in SE only, so they have to stay at the platform level because the containers do have different class loading models and everything. So on the one hand, they test the same behavior. On the other hand, within different context. So
Yeah, okay.
So I'm reading these bullets, and this is something different what we're talking about, right? Standalone TCK will contain tests extracted from the platform TCK, like JSON-P plugability tests. Yeah, it can, but it should not, right? So it's kind of up to the spec team, right? For instance, we have in JSON binding a new functionality which we added to standalone tests. Standalone, I mean extracted tests only at the moment, and they don't exist in the platform TCK because we're not testing anything platform related. Right?
Are there changes to the pluggability tests?
We're testing about, if we're talking about the plugability test, what Lucas mentioned.
no, well, in the core, there are no changes. But the difference is really the behavior of class loaders in each container and availability of implementations and stuff like that. Right, because if within the web container, this test basically adds custom implementation of JSON-P into the deployment unit and expects that what's provided in the var is used instead of yeah, and this is different from the behavior on in Java SE. So
I totally understand.
It tests the same thing, but in different context.
Java SE is also container, right? So basically this test tests something in different containers, including Java SE, right? So,
so
that's okay.
We have to keep it in both places, basically. That's what I'm trying to say.
What I'm trying to say that there are platform tests, right? Which should test interoperability. In case of your how's it called, plugability test, it should be in the platform tests, right? And maybe something else. And there are standalone tests, which are testing your implementation, right? Standalone Java SE container. And in case of JSON-B, your plugability test should be there too, right? And that standalone tests should contain a bunch of other tests, right? Which are testing that implementation is compatible with specification. And this bunch of tests should potentially not be a part of a platform test, right?
In my opinion, it doesn't have to be important. From my own personal perspective, what's important at the platform level is to execute signature tests within each container, to execute these pluggability tests in each container, and probably one or two some simple tests. And that's basically it. But that's just my opinion.
But I think they're talking about the same.
So,
Yeah, I think that's what we're trying to agree on. I think we agree on that.
I guess the question was, so there's two different options here, the question marks. Either, the tests need to be identical in both, or it's just that the platform TCK needs to have, needs to be synced and updated to contain, the updated API usage that's in the standalone, but not necessarily all the same test as the standalone TCK. So,
Yeah.
do we allow varying amounts, or do we have identical tests and only test what can be tested in both, which means a reduction in both
Yeah,
sides? So I think it's
Well,
first case.
I think we are going too deep into details at the moment. We can be the
Probably.
same, we can be not.
Probably. So
I don't see any point for them to be identical, because what was the point of pulling them out then? I mean, clearly you have functionality that is just targeted to implementation details that you're trying to exercise relative to the specification that has nothing to do with the container environment. And then you have details on if I'm an E2B component, or I'm deploying an application with these components, and I need control over how I bundled the implementations of serializers, deserializers, et cetera, at the container level. That's when I need to test. I mean, all the other details have already been tested. There's no point to retesting them within the container unless there's expectation that things like a security context or transaction context or persistence context are going to affect it. Doesn't sound like that's a case for JSON P and B, because they're relatively focused specifications.
was the idea of having identical tests just so, because we don't want to lose the platform tests that are already there? Was that the thinking there, Ed?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I was trying to ask was, from the moment we extracted those pluggability tests to what exists in the TCK today, were there any changes with respect to however they're testing compatibility? If there weren't, then we already have the tests we need in platform TCK. We don't need to copy anything back. If there have been changes since it was extracted, if they're doing something different to verify compatibility, then whatever those modifications are need to go back into the platform TCK.
I believe that these pluggability tests are in sync.
So if that's the case, then we just delete all the other tests. We just disable all the other tests, run the standalone vehicle, and then run the pluggability tests in each of these vehicles, and I think we're done.
Okay, so basically I'm gonna move that up. I guess this is really okay. So if the pluggability test, if the JSON, let me make sure I capture this. Pluggability.
I don't know that you need to capture it all. I think you could just say we've concluded that the pluggability tests in the platform TCK are sufficient for E10. If you want to make a note that we need to remind ourselves that those pluggability tests are shared between these two TCKs, that wouldn't be a terrible thing, because eventually one of them will change. Most likely the pluggability, somebody will add a new pluggability test in the standalone TCK. And we want to make sure that gets that reflected back. Right. These these test suite needs to remain synchronized.
Okay. All right. Okay. So that's really the defining thing, and that was because, you know, the spec the spec lead identified, you know, that as important, and that was the conversation, and we had it right here. Great. Okay. I'm just gonna, I think I can remove the rest of this then. Let's see.
Yeah, I think that's just accurate.
So I'm good with that for JSON BMP. I don't know, Scott. I don't know about CDI, or you. Do you have it?
Well,
We don't really-
CDI is already dealing with this problem, but you know, but we used our Killian to deal with it. So
Okay.
yeah, I mean, the bigger question for CDI is in the future, we want to break out the fact that we have dependencies on all these downstream containers so that we can
Yes,
actually
yes.
really get TCK.
Yeah,
You know,
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Okay, so for the other TCKs, we'll need to identify which test must stay in the platform, so we can remove, so we could remove the other tests. We'll,
Well,
you
see,
know,
the thing, Scott, the
Yep.
concern I have is that in many cases, the component specs don't necessarily have an intimate understanding of what the platform requirements are.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, I don't think we can entirely rely on the component teams to do that analysis. Right. The
no, yeah,
platform
absolutely.
group has to do
Yeah,
that.
I mean,
okay,
yeah, whoever wrote the integration tests, you know, needs to verify that that there aren't additional integration tests required, you know, for a given update to a component specification.
Right. So JMS, you know, there's a bunch of stuff in on message that's JMS related, but the standalone JMS stuff has nothing to do, you know, doesn't do any of it. So anyway, okay, we're over time, and I think at least I have to get on to another call.
okay. Thanks, everybody. I'm gonna stop recording now.
Thank you. Have a nice day.